From 1904 or so, we can see this happening. Initially, they are small doodles where an eraser or mistake is turned into a little decorative motif. Over the years, the size and character of these doodles grew. Gradually, they begin to become more lyrical in nature. And by 1924, we suddenly see that he seems to be doing them more consciously. Sometimes a whole page is erased and turned into a doodle. So the poem is completely gone and you have a page full of doodle. Which means he was becoming conscious of the image quality of the doodles. If we look back at his whole development during these years, we will see that he was keeping track of the developments in art, not only in India, but in other parts of the world, and also looking at traditional arts in different cultures. In 1924, these doodles were sort of seen or discovered by Victoria Ocampo when he was in Argentina. And she probably recognized the artistic quality, the aesthetic quality of these doodles, which Rabindranath seems to have been a little unaware of till then. He was doing it, but he didn't probably pay much attention to that. Now, having become aware of these artistic, or made to be aware of these artistic qualities, he seems to have taken it more seriously during the next few years. But it took another 4 years for him to turn to real painting. So it's only in 1928 that we see that he went into full-fledged painting. He was beginning at the age of 67 or so, his paintings. And he has been writing for more than 50 years, composing music and so on. So he was an experienced, creative man with a whole mental world behind him. And there was a whole area of experience waiting to be explored through images. So that makes him, although a latecomer into painting, somebody who is very rich in experience. There is a visual world, or a world of experience at least, behind him that probably a beginner, an younger beginner would not have. So Rabindranath's late beginning is also, in a sense, a kind of blessing, because you start off with a whole lot of experience awaiting to be explored in another medium. So when you look at these faces, we see just not the appearance of people, but maybe, latent stories, latent experiences. So as a writer, he wanted to create these characters, and when you look at his faces, you will probably notice that these faces don't just represent the visual, features of a face, but also etch into them the kind of a little story of the man. Some of them are rural faces, that there is probably a whole experience of peasantry behind them. Some of them are urban faces and probably had a rather easier life, and you can see that in the contours of the faces. Some of them have probably had very dark and tragic experiences, and they are imprinted onto the faces. So these faces are, characters that tells us little stories. Many not in an elaborated narrative way, but in a visual way they seem to be impressed with these experiences. Similarly, when we look at his figure works, one of the distinguishing features of many of his figure paintings is the use of gesture. Now, the language of gesture was something which was familiar to him as a playwright and an actor himself. And he seems to be consciously using them. So those images, when you look, they don't narrate a story, but they have theatrical moments in them. And these theatrical moments are again pregnant with narrative potentiality. not stories, but a narrative potentiality. So, while he kept his paintings away from his literature, kept them totally limited them to the visual, to the perceptual, but at the same time, his experience as a writer contributed to their content or to the complexity of these images. Rabindranath has probably himself said, somewhere that, maybe the eyes of Kadambari Devi comes to his mind when he sits down to draw or something. But the idea of seeing that in or projected into his painting, in a big way, I think is a little over statement, a little exaggeration. Because if you look at the hundreds and hundreds of faces he did, that little oval-shaped face are only a handful in the total kind of thing. And so I don't say that. And for a creative person who is so multifaceted as Rabindranath, he would not be driven by one kind of thing. I'm sure personal experiences do come into one's mind of a creative person in a certain way once in a while. But I don't think so. He was a man who was, pinned down by any such things. There were so many tragic incidents in his life. And it might bring in an element of power or emotion in his work. But if you look at his total work, he was so much concerned with issues of the world.